and welcome to our show, Vibe It Up with Multiple Streams of Consciousness. I'm Dr. Lexis Johnson, and I have a fabulous guest for you here today. His name is Zen Benefiel, and he was adopted as an infant. In 1975, a quest for truth in college brought him on a near-death experience. With profound understanding, remained and now a 20-year coach. His background includes work in the aerospace industry, secondary and post-secondary education, radio and television, event production, and team building for multi-million-dollar construction projects. Facilitating people, places, and things to work together better ties into harmony among people and planet as his passion and work purpose in life and work. His recent Evo Leap includes hosting One World in a New World podcast, and from a serendipitous encounter with it, from it accepted the executive director position with Live and Let Live Global Peace Movement, of which I host the Vancouver chapter if I can ever get my act together and get it started. Welcome, Zen. How are you doing?
Oh, pleasure to be here, Alexis. Great. Thanks. Great introduction. And it's Evo Leap. It's like you think about evolution, but it's kind of more of an evil leap into the future and into this wonderful world that we have available in those multiple streams of consciousness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So did you coin that phrase, Evo Leap?
No, actually, a good friend of mine now on the other side, his name was Edwin Ward in real life. In his life, it was Michael Valentine Zamora, after Michael Valentine Smith from Strangers in Strange Land. He was actually,
That's right.
He started the waterbed industry, took a waterbed in the back of a furniture store in LA, got the owner to put it in the front window and launched the industry. And in 1971, March issue of Time magazine, he was written up as a prophet of his own time.
Wow.
Interesting fellow.
Wow. Well, I have a feeling you've got a little bit of that notoriety hiding inside of you. I think we just need to pull it out of you and make you a well-known name too, because I've had discussions with you before. In fact, our discussion in your podcast is still up on LinkedIn somewhere, because I keep seeing it being reshared over and over and over again. And we had a fabulous conversation. So I hope we'll have one of those again. Yeah, we talked about all kinds of things. So let me ask you, when and why did you start exploring cognitive science, metaphysics, and philosophy? Probably the same reasons I did, but let's hear your story.
Well, as you mentioned, I was adopted early. I was orphaned at birth, adopted. I found out I was adopted at 4.5 when they brought my sister home, and that turned me inside. And that's when it all started. I had some experiences. A voice showed up not too long after that simply called out from the dark, "Hey, you." Right. And I paid attention. Yeah.
Hey, you. Oh my goodness.
I was, I had questioned whether I'd been to Sunday school, 4.5. So I had this at least loose concept of God and heaven and all that kind of stuff. And so I wondered, who my biological parents were, why I wasn't with them, and if I had a father and mother in heaven that I could talk to. Right. So a couple of months later, I'm standing at on the landing of our stairway, looking out over the front porch through a window, had my elbows on the windowsill and my chin in my hands. And it was after dark. I was waiting for Dad to come home from the store with some ice cream. And all of a sudden I hear this deep voice say simply, "Hey, you." And it was so loud and so wise, I guess. It just felt like a wise father reaching out. I wasn't afraid, but I did because it was so loud, I spun around and I asked my mother if she heard it, because I knew that she had to have, as loud as it was. And sure enough, she didn't. So that made me understand that there was something going on inside that was different than outside. And so I learned how to communicate with that voice in the next few years. And it's been kind of with me ever since.
So what was happened after "Hey, you"? What was the comment after "Hey, you"? Was it something profound or even memorable?
Well, actually nothing, because I wanted to get validation that I heard it. And so I didn't continue the conversation. What happened, though, over the next few months is I started standing in front of the window at night, not that particular one, but in windows in the house with lights
Mhm.
on. And, of course, you couldn't see out. So I would send this telepathic message of that same, hey, you,
Mhm.
out, and I would stand there and I would wait. And of course, young kid's mind is rambling around and all kinds of different things, waiting. And then once I learned to be quiet, it returned. But I had to
Yeah.
learn how to listen without interruption. Right?
Yeah, that's the hard part, isn't it?
It is, because we tend to ask questions and want to answer them with the intelligence we think we have.
Exactly. And so who is it that said that we can't fix a problem with the same set of tools we
Einstein.
created the problem with? Yeah. So
It's
that sounds like
we
about the
can't fix problems with the same thinking that created them.
same thinking. That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it sounds like it's a little bit of that going on. So when you finally did get your message, was it something profound, something worth repeating,
Well,
or
these kinds of things, they don't just happen all at once. It's a lifetime experience. What happened over the next, well, I was 5 at that time, or
that's
just
pretty
approaching. And yeah, and yet, I had the perfect setup with the being orphaned and adopted, because most kids don't have that. And so I
young.
had this gap that I was attempting to fill even at that age.
Mm-hmm.
And at 7, I started having out of body experiences. At 8,
Wow.
I woke up. Yeah, I came home from playing with the kids in the neighborhood one afternoon, and I lay across my bed, just kind of really tired. And I closed my eyes, and all of a sudden, it felt like I was separating from my body somehow. I got a little spooked, and the voice
Kidding.
simply says, "Just relax, take a breath, and let go. Everything will be fine." And so I was like, okay. And so I did. The next thing I know, I'm up at my ceiling looking at my body and laying across the bed. And as soon as I recognized that was happening, I, of course, snapped back into my body.
Yeah.
Again, thinking as opposed to
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah. It's
So
hard to do that.
then,
It's hard not to do that though, to allow the experience, because as soon as we start figuring it out, bang, it's gone. Right?
well, that's the thing. We would try to figure it out. We ask questions and we think by asking questions, we're going to force answers to come
Yeah.
instead of intending to understand and then allowing that understanding to emerge from the experience, which is what it does. It may not
Mm-hmm.
happen in that moment, because these kinds of experiences are nonlinear, non-local. So it's hard to have a linear conversation in those kinds of experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it could take days, weeks, months, sometimes years or decades to unfold.
Exactly.
I've had several of things, my conversation with Jeffrey Mishlev that was a 28-year cycle. Um, so those kinds of things do happen. We just
Mm-hmm.
need to allow them to, set our intent and let go. At 8, though, the out of body experience has changed. I woke up in bed, actually above my bed in the corner of my room one night, looking at my physical body laying in bed. And
Mm-hmm.
I watched it get out of bed, climb out my bedroom window, walk across the neighbor's backyard, climb a fence that surrounded a 10-acre pasture. I lived in rural Indiana. And
Mm-hmm.
then as I was walking out into the pasture, my physical body started raising up into the air. And I looked up from my observer self, and I see this orange cigar-shaped cloud that's got to be a mile long. And I continue to rise. And as I'm entering the cloud with the physical body, my observer becomes one with it. And I move into the cloud. And I wake up in bed the next morning, can't wait to go back. Don't know what happened inside.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
then those kinds of things are that almost identical experience happened for almost 2 years biweekly, at least a couple of times a month.
Mm-hmm.
And then it wasn't until I was getting ready to move to Phoenix many years later, I was walking through a metaphysical bookstore in Muncie, Indiana. A book falls off the shelf. I walk over and I see it's Strangers Among Us by Ruth Montgomery. Had no idea who she was at the time.
Of course.
But I pick it up and I turn it over. And the first paragraph that I read, paraphrased, says something like the most common contactee experiences in the Midwest in the late 50s and the early 60s was the orange cigar-shaped cloud. So that kind of put things into perspective. Hadn't thought about it that way. And then, of course,
I'm going to have to read that. I'll tell you why. One of my first adult experiences with out of body was that same thing. I won't tell you the whole big long thing, but the earth was covered with an orange cloud. Like the whole earth was covered with an orange cloud. And I was riding on the back of a big white bird, swooping and picking up certain people in the feathers of the bird. Like they would just climb into the bird. And that was one of my very first experiences. And from that, I thought it meant that I would be helping lots and lots of people. And that orange thing has come up several times in a lot of my out-of-body experiences. And orange is not one of my favorite colors, but that's a color that keeps coming up and repeating. And I think the orange is telling me I'm on track with my soul journey.
Well, one of the books that Michael gifted me upon his death is called The Craft of Power. And a very interesting book. And in it, it talks about the color orange being the color of business.
Oh, really?
So
really?
Now, whether that's earthly business, heavenly business, cosmic business, could be all, right? It's the color of business. So you got to get down to business.
Well, in my world, because I'm a color therapist, and in my world, orange is the color of stress. It's a very happy color, and you can use it for other things, but it is the color used for stress because it's the sacral chakra, which deals with stress in your body. Wow. Okay. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a commercial break, and maybe your commercial will come up. I'm asking my audience to grab their cell phones and put your camera on and scan the QR code, because that's where your commercial will give you a gift. We'll be right back. And we are back with our fabulous guest, Zen Benefiel, who's actually our first guest that's actually talking about consciousness, because most of our guests are talking about alternative healing methods that are about quantum healing and other types of metaphysical healing. And this is our first real guest on actual consciousness. So Zen, you had a wonderful gift for us. Can you tell us just a little bit about what's in the gift?
Well, first of all, the wonderful commercial. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
0 to 1 is a combination of, it started out as a chapter for another compilation that was questioning what consciousness is, how humans can perceive it. Is there a common experience among what's called the contact modalities, which are kind of like the clairals of consciousness?
I love when you say.
So the book basically goes into several different things in answering those questions. One is the holistic system in our body, which includes the chakras, meridians, datuns, and the marma, and there's other systems beyond that as well. And then I offer some personal experience of things that I've questioned and answers that I've gotten, and how that fits into the evolution of a planetary society in making our way towards a conscious civilization, which is kind of where we're at now. It's based on the Kardashev scale, if anybody's familiar with that. Type 1 is a planet that utilizes all the energy to produce things without having to use fossil fuels and things like that, wind, air, water, those kinds of things. A type
Okay.
2 utilizes the solar system's energy, and a type 3 utilizes the galactic energy. Now, you can imagine the kind of intelligence and consciousness and the multidimensionality of it that has to go along with that too. But a lot of those things we don't really think about yet because we're still trying to find our way here on this planet in the 3D world, let alone, experience the multiple dimensions that are available and have evidence of.
Okay, so basically it's a chapter. What your gift is
No,
it's a chapter.
it turned into a book. The chapter was only
Oh,
supposed to be, 30 pages long, and I just kept writing, and it just kept
oh my
getting bigger
goodness. You didn't give
and
us your whole book, did you?
oh yeah.
Oh, you crazy guy. You crazy guy. Well, that's
Well, I've
amazing.
got 18 more or 19 more on the web, so maybe that'll get somebody to look into the other ones.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so very much. So we're talking about the evolution of intelligence, and you talked about galactic. So that just, for most people, sounds like so far into Star Trek, into the future. How is the evolution of intelligence occurring in our world today? How are we going to get to that point?
Well, there are a few factors involved, and we'll start in the big way, kind of like Dr. Laszlo does in talking about the higher self, and that there's this overarching consciousness that manages everything. And we're individuated entities from that. They're kind of like a thread in the tapestry, and we just don't know what the tapestry looks like yet, but we've got a bunch of other threads next to us that's making something, right?
Okay.
So
That's
on
a good
a
point.
cosmological scale, all the different calendars point to this time in our history that we are in our future, that we are making massive changes in the way we think about things, and that there's a natural order that's emerging that is embedded within us that we've been ignorant to for so long because we've been focused on the outer world. And as we all know, we live half outside and half inside. And we just have been bereft about the inner exploration en masse. However, there have been a few throughout history, and even the ancient texts allude to this fact. The Sanskrit, namaste, that's the divine in me recognizes the divine in you. The Mayan, in la ketch, that's I am another you. And these are two ancient cultures that understood this. Well, why don't we? We're too busy competing against each other for eyeballs, for one, right? Especially in cyberspace. Well, that's another factor, is that all the calendars have lined up in scripture and prophecy and all that kind of thing as well. Now, so where do we find the science to back that up? In 1989, I had an experience called the multi-plane awareness technique, or with the multi-plane awareness technique, which was a technique developed by William Swigard in the 1950s. And it is a facilitated experience that takes the experiencer through 9 planes of consciousness and integrates them with their bodies on each one of those planes of consciousness. You can look at it as a rainbow, start like you mentioned earlier. The red is the root, the orange, the sacral, the yellow, the solar plexus, and so on and so forth.
Right.
Well, those kind of akin themselves to a bandwidth of frequency. And each one of those bandwidths basically has a whole civilization on it, if you were to really understand what's there. Different than our own, and yet we're part of, because we're all connected with that through our multiple bodies. Well, after having that, now what was funny is that I got to the end of, or what I thought was the end of the experience, because the facilitator gave me the prompt to get ready to come back. And they take you from the 4th to the 12th plane and then go beyond that for a little bit and then come back. Well, you're supposed to drop the bodies off as you come back. And I heard the prompt to get ready to come back. And I just came back, with my eyes up, and turned to look at the facilitator. And the first thing he says is, "Uh-oh." I was like, "What? What did?" He says, "Well, we weren't done yet. You were supposed to drop the bodies off." And I'm like, "Oh, well," because I was kind of treating it a little flippantly. I've got a vivid imagination, so it's easy for me to go to those places, or at least I think I have a vivid imagination.
Bit of a rebel, aren't you?
Well, well, maybe I'm just, I have easy access, and it just seems like an imagination. So what happened that night and for the next couple of weeks is I had a party in my room and didn't understand what was going on. I'd wake up startled the first night to all this noise that was happening. And then I had a psychic friend she and I were working on an event together. She'd left her day timer, got home, called me up at 11:30 at night and said, my dinner, it's my life. Can I come pick it up? And I'm thinking to myself, perfect opportunity. Ask her if she just wants to stay rather than travel. What she gets.
Yep.
Well, sure enough, middle of the night, she sits straight up in bed and she says, my God, how can you sleep in here? There's got to be at least a dozen different beings in this room. At that point, it's like, oh man, that was me. And I realized it. Well, so here we are many years later, and I never did put the bodies back. So somehow they've learned how to integrate, right? They're not in the closet, right? They're fully visible. Then
the closet.
Yeah. So in 2018, I got the opportunity I'd mentioned earlier about Jeffrey Mishlev. My first show in 1990 was called One World. I wanted to emulate two people, Bill Moyers and Dr. Jeffrey Mishlev. And I hoped someday I would have the opportunity or be worthy of an interview with one of them. 2018 rolls around. I get a voicemail from Jeffrey from another website I manage. He'd just done an interview with another person, thought my audience would enjoy it, asked me to view it and see what I could do to help promote it. So I did, sent him a link and sent him a copy of my big book, which is called Stubbing My Toe on Purpose. Subtitle is A Seminal View of Consciousness, Cosmology, and the Congruence of Science and Spirituality. Light reading, right? And so I sent that to him. 3 days later, I get an email back, hey, would you like to come talk about it? And so in my process of going through his shows to kind of get up to speed on the interviews that I had missed, I ran across a guy named Vernon Neppy, and he and Edward Close put together a theory of everything quantum physics model called the triadic dimensional distinction vortical paradigm. And in that, they posit that consciousness, space, and time are tethered across, guess what? 9 dimensions for the human experience. Doesn't eliminate other dimensions, just says that, okay, in our consciousness, we're just limited to those 9. Well, now so that's a mathematical model that pretty much for me validated my physical experience or my visceral experience in a way that just made sense, right? It just felt resonant. And then there's the spiral dynamics model that also gets into a 9-level kind of thing where the highest level is it recognizes oneness, right? And that's pretty much where we're headed to. We've heard the phrase, we don't understand really what it is, and many think, from my experience, that we give up our individuation in order to become one. Well, just the opposite is true. We become more of a perfected form, fit, and function in our specific functionality in the world as a result.
Wow.
Which is quite the opposite.
I'm really glad to hear that.
Well,
really glad to hear that. Okay, so we're going to take another break. Just have a breather here because that is fascinating. So leap in your mind to the next topic because we'll be right back with Zen Benefiel. We're at Vibe It Up Multiple Streams of Consciousness. Grab your phones. We have another gift for you to scan with your camera. We'll be right back. we're back with Vibe It Up TV, multiple streams of consciousness, and I'm having a fascinating discussion here with Zen Benefiel. So we were talking about the evolution of intelligence with the world today, and I don't even know where to go from here because I like that's such a deep discussion. I think we could have had the whole entire show on just that one discussion. But you're a coach and a facilitator, right?
I
So
am, and with a couple of master's degrees in business as well. So I'm not just talking about the foo-foo. I actually can put it into practical and pragmatic use and show others how as
so
well.
you're kind
My
of a twin
life's
here.
been built around learning how to get people, places, and things to work together better.
Okay. So when you're coaching people, are you coaching them more on the business level or more on the extra business level, the extra sensory business level?
I don't know that there's a difference because they're all integrated. And
Well,
in the
I have a problem.
conversation, of course, there are um, there's layers, and we unpack what's going on as far as what their uh, specific action items have been or what they're attempting to express or create on a physical level. And then as we're talking about that, I'm also listening to the words that they're using and the belief systems that they introduce that
Mm,
are hidden, right? Some of them are cognitively dissonant, and so
mm,
when those kinds of things come up, then it's like, wait a minute, you're saying this and you're doing this, and those two aren't congruent. You see that. And so those kinds of opportunities come up. And then we dive deeper into how to, pay more attention to the serendipity and the synchronistic events that are taking place and the self-awareness that's
mm,
necessary to be in a more still place. We hear this, you got to be still, and we can be, and with practice, you can be still in the moment, and that moment can be a nanosecond when you're practiced in being so. So you more available to the intimacy of the intelligence that surrounds us, if you will.
mm,
And by doing so, then all of these constructs can be put into an action plan and combine the intelligence, the gut, the heart, and the head, right?
mhm.
Which is the kind of the reverse
The three.
direction that most people go. They start in the head and shove it down their body if they even know what their body is like. We don't feel our bodies for the most part, and we operate from the shoulders up because we're stuck in the competitive
Mm,
bipolar world. So it's a
yep.
thinking environment.
World of duality.
Yeah. So, from a gut level, that's the oneness thing. That's where everything, all the vibrations, all the sensations, everything that's available to us can be felt and then synthesized or um, digested and distilled in the heart as to whether it resonates or not. And
Mhm,
then go into the head as to, okay, now what do I do with this?
mm,
Right. So your being starts, then you're having, then you're doing.
mm. Okay, I get it. So, for the people listening in our audience, is there anything that you can recommend that we can do to get to that galactic, type of experience? Because the world that we're in is still this very strong world of duality, this very strong patriarchal system, and I'm working, and a lot of us are working to help bring the feminine balance in, so we have balance. Not so
Sure.
one will be more than the other, but what can you
Well,
recommend
that's
that we
still
can
a
do as a
bipolar definition, Lexis. And I think what we miss is it's about harmony, and harmony doesn't mean necessarily
one or
balance.
the
It
other?
doesn't mean bliss. It doesn't mean a utopia. It means the management of the patterns of chaos.
Mm,
As we
okay.
still ourselves in the midst of chaos, this is one thing Sri Aurobindo said years ago. In order to find your center, you must step into the middle of chaos. Well, this forces you to be still and look around you, um, not to be pushed and pulled in every direction imaginable, trying to find your center. And this is
Mm,
where we think ourselves into places where we don't really need to be. So what happens is that by bringing this practical sense into play,
mm,
we don't need to think about the cosmic things, only that they're possible at this
mm.
point, right? Because we can't
Possibility.
go there. What we can do is we can go in here. and learn
Inside.
more about ourselves, self-awareness, self-reflection, look at the world, see how it matches up to how we're feeling. And if it doesn't match up to how we're feeling, then we're basically deceiving ourselves because we're projecting something and not realizing it, in my
Well,
opinion.
I kind of agree with you there, because it's like microcosm and macrocosm. Going inside to me is the same thing as going up into my higher self. It's another, like a library of.
Absolutely. Ultimately, that's exactly what happens. However, you have to go in order to go out, you know.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly,
and
exactly.
there's a bunch of songs about that too, right?
Yeah.
So got to go in to go out. And it's a fascinating journey full of choices, opportunities, sometimes, angst. One of the things that I learned when I was younger, I had near anxiety attacks on at certain times. I was exploring psychotropics as a teenager, and you can get really nervous and out of sorts. And I found myself one day putting my fingertips together, and in so doing, there was a moment where I paused and I felt my heartbeat in my fingertips. And so I just started paying
It's all the
attention to
time.
it. Right. And this is kind of where I think, the pause for prayer comes from, is
Yeah, I do it all the
feeling
time.
that heartbeat, paying attention to your breath. And those are the two things that give us life, right?
Mhm.
So in paying attention to those, then that brings us into center, and we're officially out of our minds because we're
Mhm.
feeling at that point. We're feeling our heartbeat. We're sensing our respiration, right? Or our inspiration, as the case may be.
It's
And
right.
so then we're able to get further in touch. Now, these things, they take time. It's a discipline. You have to practice them. And, so too often we're given the tools and the opportunities, and we're too impatient to take the time to develop the discipline. And
Yeah, well,
so we gloss over
it
it.
always surprises me that we're born with so many children keep this, they retain some of this extra, I don't even know what you call it, the otherworldly experience. They bring it in, and they see things and they hear things and they feel things that as adults we've lost that ability for. And yet, where does it go, and how do we get it back? And isn't that our
It's never
natural
gone.
being?
It's
It's
never
never,
gone. It has
but
never
we don't
left us.
we can use
The
it.
only
So
difference is we don't give it attention,
exactly.
or
So we
put
need to
our
practice.
attention. So that there's three things. There's multiple Trinity fractals, if you will, throughout this experience. Faith, love, and trust being one, and
Mm,
attention, intention, and interaction being another. One of the questions I had, speaking of Trinity, was where does it come from? Where does this belief system, come from? Because it's ubiquitous in all the major religions. And
mhm,
so my guide, I was getting ready to do a similar experience to the multi-plane, only it was called multi-level. And
mhm.
my guide shows up and waves me out, says, come. And the practice is to develop your light body and extend it, and then put your consciousness in it and travel. And then report back to the facilitator who's asking the questions about your experience. Well, so we're traveling, Zephyr and I are traveling across the universe. Stars go by for a little bit, and then there's nothing. And we continue talking, and then we arrive at this three sun system with a dozen small green spheres around it. And the three spheres dwarf these green spheres by 20, 30 times. And I felt like Ellie did in Contact, where she's just
Mm.
in such awe that there's tears streaming down her face. That's how I felt with this. And the next thing I know, I hear one voice as many say, we are not only your forefathers, we are also the forefathers of your solar system. And of course, I wanted to start asking questions. What do you mean by that, right? And Zephyr says, nope, that's it. You got enough. That's all you need. You'll
Oh my
figure it out.
God.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, come on. Well, I mean, a true master, right? They don't tell you where to look or what to see. They just get you to ask the right questions. So we come back, and during our discussion on the way back, I'm postulating a bunch of different things. And so I'm looking at the macro, the Trinity, And my first question, okay, where's the micro? First instinct was proton, electron, and neutron. Well, there's, according to quantum science, there's 99% space in that. It's actually 100% space because there is no matter there. It's just vibrational
Right.
strings, right? And this is one of the things I got into with Dr. Laszlo. I mentioned that, and he says, "Oh, actually, it's all energy," and he's right. So in this energy, we have the ability to condense. This is what I learned in my white light experience as a teenager, which we really didn't talk about. Um, I prayed to know what truth was and was willing to die for it. Was asked if I was willing to die for what I believed in. Cosmic consciousness was it. I said yes. I ended up in the white light and beyond, got my marching orders in a sphere of pinpoints of light, and then came back. Whole experience was about 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Well, what I got from it was two things. One, there is no death because I can still think. And two, was that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form. We're just unaware of it. And that goes back to those 9 layers of finer and finer vibratory rates. And as we condense, that's, we lower frequency and it condenses into form. There was this guy long ago that was the most high angel of music and light. Right. Well, what do you think happened to him? He learned how to condense into form. Right. Wasn't a bad guy. This is why all the fingers are pointing at him, trying to say, no, don't go there. Stay away, be aware, or beware. It's more like be aware, because for that kind of unqualified consciousness, if you will, or formless consciousness, to be able to condense into form and experience creation, that takes some doing and intelligence way beyond what we're capable of understanding yet. And yet here we are. Right. So how are we? Who are we really? And then what is really the depth of,
isn't it?
Well, it is. And what's the depth of motivation that we have for living? Dying's easy. Living's the hard part.
No kidding. And on that note, let's go for another commercial and we'll be back. And you can talk to us about your global peace movement in a minute. So
folks, message from our sponsor.
Yeah, another word from our sponsor, another word from ourselves here as sponsors. So we're going to have you scan for another gift. We'll be right back with Vibe It Up and Zen Benefiel with multiple streams of consciousness. Well, my friends, we're back at Vibe It Up, Multiple Streams of Consciousness, and your gift was an amazing book from our guest, Zen Benefiel, who's now going to tell us about his Live and Let Live global peace movement and its premise. Take the floor.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm so excited about this. And we're talking about serendipitous and synchronistic moments. And I interviewed you originally on One World and a New World. Well, same thing happened. And it's on YouTube as well. So one of my shows, I interviewed a local gentleman, Mark Victor, who is a defense attorney, and I'd known him for 12.5 years, and had been in touch with him over the last few years, but I thought he'd make a great guest with different points of view and how he found himself and his own self-awareness and got where he's at. And then we get to talking about the Live and Let Live global peace movement. And I find myself just fascinated by it. And so we had lunch about a week and a half later, and He asked me to become part of it. And our interview was in January. By mid-March, I was the executive director. Now, and with 30 chapters in 19 countries already
Oh
since
my
August of
goodness.
2020. Now,
You're a little bit of an overachiever, aren't you, Zen?
not yet.
Oh my goodness. Working on it, huh?
Yeah. So I don't know what I can't do. That's the thing, right? And of course, my
Right.
marching orders as a teenager, when I passed through the light and went beyond, was that I'm here to help facilitate a new world order, and that would happen in my lifetime. COVID brought that opportunity about, in my opinion. And so now all of us are recentering. We're asking deeper questions. We're getting over ourselves and looking at how we can work together better to create a better world. Well,
Yep.
Live and Let Live, it is not just a song. It actually has two principles embedded in it. The live is a legal principle, which means don't be an aggressor. We have allowed aggression to take place via our laws and legislation to the point where we allow countries to aggress against each other. That's in the 21st century. To me, that's ridiculous,
It's incorrigible.
right? It's horrific that we're still doing that, as evolved as we are in other ways. We just haven't learned how to get along with each other.
No,
And,
it's like
like
little
Jeffrey
boys in the
said,
sandbox fighting over a toy.
yeah, the guys upstairs see us as a bunch of alpha males and pyramids and silos competing against each other. And there's no cooperation in that. That's the old alpha mind. The beta mind is steeped in oneness. We understand that. We just haven't learned how to experimentally come out of this pandemic and move forward effectively with it. We're learning, though, because we're experimenting to do so. Now, hopefully, this long-term view, we want to be able to establish a law firm globally that is capable of helping those in various regions and locations to actually go into the law and change the laws that allow aggression. And so that the government, no corporation, nobody can aggress upon another, right? How can we have peace if we allow aggression? It's just not going to happen. And
Exactly.
there are consequences for those who aggress, just like there are now. Now, the let live side of it is a moral side of it, and you might even see it as kind of an ethical side, where as long as you're not aggressing on another and you're happy doing, living your life, leave you alone. Leave me alone. Right? Mark says he's the iron-fisted dictator of his body, his property, his mind, his money, all that kind of stuff. And that's true freedom. That's what we need to be able to be in this world, is free from any, as long as we don't aggress. And of course, aggression can take place in many ways, pollution, coercion, fraud, all those kinds of things. So it spans yet, kind of an umbrella. When you combine those two, and the whole live and let live philosophy, how can you disagree with that? Most rational, reasonable human beings will say, yeah, right? That just makes sense. And it's so simple, and that it does make sense. Now, in complexology and complex theory and things things can be complex, but they don't have to be complicated. Right? The root of things are very simple. We have just got to this place where we think everything has to be so complex and we can't understand them that we need lawyers to interpret. Right? That's kind of pun intended because of Mark being an attorney. And his firm is actually called Attorneys for Freedom. They founded the movement.
Okay.
So if there's anything that I've seen, and I've been involved in the outskirts and inskirts of a lot of different movements, that this one seems to have the most direct route to actually doing the things that can promote that opportunity for peace to occur.
Okay.
That's what I'm excited about. Now, coming in as an executive director with 30 chapters in 19 countries, there was a lot of movement, and there wasn't that much infrastructure. And training or things of that nature. So myself and actually my co-director, the events executive, Jennifer Hunt. I don't know why I said Smith. Oh, I know. I was thinking Wilbert Smith and his dealings with the guys from elsewhere. Something else I wanted to talk about. But Jennifer and I have been putting together the infrastructure and the trainings and what we're calling events in a box, which are set up like a world cafe so that it can be done both online and offline, and gather people together to, first of all, really talk about what it means to be a better human, which is what the moral principle is. Just be a good human. So these kinds of things and the opportunistic time that we're in to carry them out is it's a dream come true for me, and feeling like I'm fulfilling destiny for my own path.
You are.
As arduous and complicated and sometimes overwhelming as that may seem to some, I come from a background where I've dealt with 250,000 people in one night putting on an event. 1 to 5 people to do so, but still, I can stand in the middle of chaos and find my center and be in my center.
Find the eye of the storm. You are the eye of the storm.
Well, when you're both the storm and the eye is what we come to recognize.
There you go.
Right?
There you go. And
we create the storm first.
How many live and let live individual little clusters do we have? Because I know I'm facilitating the one in Vancouver, which we're just about to get started here.
Right.
How many?
Right now, I think we're at 34, 35. We've had 4 or 5 more come on since I've come on. And right now, we've just, in August, actually, we're going to have discussion groups that are hosted by various chapter leaders on every day of the week, so that people can come in and ask questions and get more familiar, and then hopefully join the movement and maybe even help start a chapter in their own location.
So in your book, is there a contact information for people to get in touch with you so that we can have people join in?
In the book, no, it was published in 2019, so that was 3 years before I found Live and Let Live.
We're just going to have you come back. We're going to have you come back so we can drum up more people to join, because I'm sure after the show.
liveandletlive.org is a very simple URL, a domain name, right? Just liveandletlive.org.
There we go.
So it's an easy one to remember, or just look up Live and Let Live, and you'll find it on Google or whatever your favorite search engine is.
Absolutely. All right. So what we're going to do, whoops, I just accidentally turned my light on my phone. We're going to have one more commercial break, and then we're going to come back and talk to you about the bridges that we were going to talk about with the spirituality and reality. And we'll be right back. But ladies and gentlemen of the audience, grab your phones, put your cameras on, and scan one more QR code for Vibe It Up Multiple Streams of Consciousness. We'll be right back. And we're back. And that last commercial was from one of our regulars, Dr. Doug Lair, speaking on quantum healing, which is a consciousness type of healing. And right now we're speaking with Zen Benefiel, and we've got about 5 minutes left before the end of our show. And we want to talk about the last little bits of words that you want to say, but we also want to talk about how do you experience the bridges that you speak about between science, spirituality, and reality?
Synchronicity. That's one of the easiest things to notice. right? Because we're in this flux capacitor, if you will, right?
Now you sound like
And
Back to the Future.
yeah, Back to the Future. Um, what we do is we're able to just center and be so completely in the moment that there is something beyond expression in it, and our ability to feel and move. And it's like we don't have to think, we don't have to consider, we just flow, which is the optimal thing. Mahaley, Csikszentmihalyi wrote a book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience years ago. And he akins flow to a jazz quartet jamming, right? Ego, time, everything disappears. It's just the music. Being a progressive jazz drummer, I totally get that. I've been in those places too. And maybe that's part of why it makes it so easy for me to go there, is because I've been that for most of my life, as well as having the impetus to explore and question everything and hold everything sacred, and yet nothing sacred. Truth will reveal itself. We got to whack away at it, or be willing to, for it to, in most cases. And so those
Yeah.
bridges occur in moments. There's this, it's like when you are, how I experience it, I'll put it this way. When I'm in the midst of doing something and I'm considering about the how and the integrity that I have and the professionalism and the perfection that I want in it, then there's this flow that takes place that turns into a combination of linear, nonlinear, non-local activity, right?
Exactly.
And
That's
they're
what
like
happened.
three threads that kind of create this really strong cord that moves you toward it. John English wrote Soul Mechanic. He calls it the momentum tunnel. And if you know one entrepreneur that's been on stage and talking about creating the vision and moving towards it, when you commit to something and you take that first step and you truly commit, the universe backs you up. It'll
Yep.
provide everything you need there, as long as you remain attentive, intentional, and interactive from that place. When you start distracting yourself by the what ifs, or oh I can't, or but, or any of those things that inhibit or constrict your flow, Goldratt calls it bottlenecks in production lines, right? So those kind of bottlenecks, we create our own system. And in order to get those bottlenecks out of the way, we just got to chill, relax. And nothing is worth getting afraid of, because our fears, and this has also been proven, the fears that we have most of them will never happen. So why
Yeah,
do
I
we,
call them the what ifs.
yeah, why do we do that then? Because we've been programmed, because this, now whether this is intentional or unintentional, I think it's just that people thought they were smart enough that they could manage others. And when they saw that there was some intelligence that was available to allow others not to be controlled, then they wanted to say, wait a minute, let's create a narrative in order to kind of keep things little, fat, dumb, and happy, right? That's not working anymore, because people are intelligent enough to see through it. And this global pandemic, I think, is a good example of how a narrative was really pushed on people that turned out to be completely false. Now, it doesn't mean there weren't problems and that there wasn't a disease and a wave of flu that was taking place that was having catastrophic effects on others.
Exactly.
Taking it to the extent that they did, though, was just heinous, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it is what it is, and I'm not so sure. Like, I really honestly believe that we create the world that we live in, and I was relatively unaffected by it. Maybe that's because of my
Oh,
belief
me
system.
too. Me too. But
But
no mask, no
I do
vax, no
believe,
nothing.
yeah, I think when you're talking about the bridges that this show is called Science, Spirituality, Reality, the bridges. I think that's what you're talking about, is getting in alignment and
Well, here's,
focus.
speaking of
Narrow
alignment, I'm going to
focus.
call myself out on what I just did,
Yeah.
thinking that the narrative was heinous. I should have no judgment on the narrative
Oh, I see
whatsoever.
what you're
It
saying.
was what it was. It happened. what happened was it allowed a silver lining to emerge that brought us together and others like us in order to do things that are better for each other in the world.
For an awful lot of people in the world, and a lot of us have been forced to awaken, which I think was part of it, and get in alignment with a new perspective of being. But we're going to have you back on another show, because I think that's fascinating, and I would love to talk to you more in depth about that. But we're out of time for today, folks. So I don't know. Why don't you all send us a message and vote on bringing Zen Benefiel back to talk to us about Live and Let Live and his Science, Spirituality, and Reality, The Bridges, with Vibe It Up, Multiple Streams of Consciousness. Come on back, folks.
Namaste.
Namaste.